Now there's stories all over the world about the fairy folk, the people who live off in the forest, and they're kind of like people. They're not entirely human though. And in the land of the Maori, known to a lot of people as New Zealand, known originally as Aotearoa, in Aotearoa they tell tales about these folk too, these strange spirit creatures that live off in the forest. Now the way you can tell these people, they're called, I've got notes written on my hand. They're called, because I don't speak Maori.
You might want to put that down a minute. There you go.
They're called turehu. The turehu are the people living in the forest, and you can spot them because they have very pale skin. That's how you know they're one of these strange creatures that are not entirely human. They're not entirely good, they're not entirely bad. Now, there was a man named Chichi, Ruarangi. Ruarangi and his wife, they lived on the edge of the forest, and they would go hunting a lot in the forest, but they lived in the village in their huare, in their house, and one day Ruarangi came home and he saw that his wife was gone. Now, he thought she must be out buying something or visiting neighbors. She didn't come back. Night fell, his wife was gone. Now, everyone in the town, in the village, they all said that his wife had left him. They said, of course, this is what happened. This isn't anything magical. It's not supernatural. There are no turehu, some of the people said. She just wasn't happy. But he knew that wasn't true. So he would go out every day, go out into the forest looking for his wife. One day he was out there and he was just about to give up hope. He laid down on the moss down by the riverside. He just laid down there, started to weep, just missing his wife. He knew that she would not leave him. He knew she loved him. And then he heard a sound just across the river, and he looked over in the brush, and he looked and he saw one of the turehu, one of these pale-skinned fairy folk from the forest. And right next to him, he saw his own wife standing with the turehu. But he called out to her, but she didn't even seem to understand his language. She was bewitched. She couldn't even understand human language. She couldn't understand the Maori language. She just stared at him. She grabbed onto the turehu, and they both kind of went walking off into the forest. So Ruarangi, he followed after them. They went faster. Ruarangi went faster. He starts jogging after them. He's calling out to her, and she looked even like she was afraid of him, like he was a different species, a different kind of creature from her. She was already turning over to their side, see. So they're running after him, and then he remembered something that his grandparents had told him about the turehu. To break their bewitchment, to break their magic, you have to take cooked human food, because they don't cook their food. They're creatures of the forest. And it just so happens he had one sweet potato, one yam in his bag, one kumara. So he pulled out this kumara, that's the last word I have to look up on my list, pulled out this cooked kumara, threw it, and it just hit his wife right in the back, right in the small of the back. And when that cooked human food hit her, it broke that spell. She looked up like she was coming out of a deep sleep, and she turned and she looked back at him. She said, Ruarangi, it's you. Where am I? What am I doing out here? She let go of the turehu, let go of it, and that pale-skinned man, he went running off into the forest. And they went back to their huare, back to the village, but she said, that thing, he's going to come back after me. I know he's going to follow me back here. So they knew the only way to keep these creatures away, there's a very sacred substance among the Maori. There's a red ochre used for paint, used for sacred ritual purposes. It's this powdered red ochre, and that's the only thing you can use to keep away these creatures, because these creatures, they can't stand holy things. So they got all of the red ochre powder that they could, and then they drew a line all around the house. Drew a line around, and then they just waited in their house. Night fell, the wind starts to blow. Everyone else is asleep in the village. And then they hear these footsteps coming up to the house, and the footsteps go all the way around the house. And then this wind blows the door open. Door flew open, and there stood that turehu stand. Now he seemed to look almost twice as tall as before. And he stood there in the doorway, and he just looked down at that line, and he looked, and he kind of bared his teeth. And so Ruarangi chased the turehu out into the plaza of the village. He chases him out. And there's this turehu, he's trying to get a hold of Ruarangi's wife. He's trying to grab her, trying to get back to the house, but Ruarangi, he was prepared. He had a bag of this powdered red ochre, so he's chasing after this creature, sprinkling it here, sprinkling it there. And he's sprinkling it all over the central plaza of that village till eventually there's nowhere safe for that turehu to step anymore. And finally that turehu, he jumps up onto the roof of the last huare, the last house in the village, and he just stands up on that roof and stares down at them, and first he's baring his teeth again like an animal. But then he howled out like a wounded animal. He looked up at the moon and he howled this long, lonesome, mournful cry. And that's when Ruarangi realized that this turehu really did love his wife as well. This creature, I mean, he might not have had any right to her, but he had fallen in love with her too, and he knew that he would miss her. And he howled because he knew he would never get her back. Then he jumped off into the forest. He went and disappeared. But they say in that village, on those lonesome moonlit nights, for years after that, sometimes from deep in the forest, you could hear that howling of the turehu, who was crying out for that human woman that he once had for just a few days. The tale of the turehu.